Marvin Kade stepped into Evelyn Harrow's quiet life like a blessing. But Detective Rhea Solberg would soon uncover that every move he made was a calculated step toward a deadly plan. What began as an unlikely marriage turned into a silent countdown, one that ended with Evelyn's body in the basement and Marvin standing calmly beside a lie he spent 52 weeks perfecting. Evelyn Harrow had lived alone for years after her husband's passing. And although she maintained a calm, gentle routine, there was always a quiet sadness in her eyes. Her days followed the same peaceful pattern. She watered her plants, tended to her small garden, and walked slowly down Ridgewood Lane each morning before returning to her tidy home. Everything in her life felt predictable, almost frozen in time, till the day she met Marvin Kade. He was 33, polite, careful with his words, and strangely reserved, but something about him caught her attention. He appeared as someone who needed direction, someone who carried secrets behind his soft expressions. Their meeting was brief, but it opened a door that neither of them could close afterward. Marvin began appearing at local charity events, always standing in the background but offering help whenever needed. Evelyn appreciated his willingness to assist her with small tasks she usually handled alone. She described him to her neighbor Tara as a young man trying to rebuild his life. This explanation softened the suspicious glances that people in the neighborhood had started giving him. Ridgewood Lane was the type of place where strangers were noticed immediately, where every unfamiliar face stirred curiosity. But Marvin remained quiet and respectful, giving no clear reason for concern. Weeks later, neighbors observed Marvin visiting Evelyn more often. He helped carry groceries, fixed small things around her house, and sometimes stayed long after sunset. Evelyn seemed to feel lighter around him. Her garden grew healthier, her steps looked more energetic, and the loneliness that once surrounded her seemed weaker. People whispered about the widening age gap, wondering why someone like Marvin would spend so much time with a woman 25 years older, yet Evelyn ignored the whispers. She seemed grateful simply to have someone to share her days with again. 3 months after their first meeting, Evelyn stunned everyone by announcing she was marrying Marvin. Tara tried to hide her surprise, but she struggled to understand how something so serious could develop so quickly. Neighbors exchanged uneasy looks when they heard the news, but Evelyn insisted that she had found companionship again. She believed she deserved happiness after years of grief, and she felt Marvin gave her what she had missed for so long: attention, care, and a sense of being needed. On the day Marvin moved into her home, he brought only 2 suitcases. He unpacked quietly and explored the house as though he had been waiting for this opportunity. His eyes lingered on family photos, wooden furniture, her late husband's belongings, and old letters stored in her drawers. He learned the layout fast, memorizing which cabinets held medicine, which locks were weak, and which rooms Evelyn rarely entered. He never spoke about his past, never described where he came from, or who he once lived with. Evelyn never pressed him for details, trusting his silence more than she should have. At first, the marriage seemed peaceful. Marvin prepared breakfast for Evelyn and insisted she rest while he handled most tasks. He appeared thoughtful, even protective. Yet Tara began to notice something different in the way Marvin moved around Evelyn's home. He walked with ownership, not as a guest or partner, but as someone slowly absorbing the space. He learned her schedule down to the minute, taking over her errands and insisting on handling her finances. Evelyn chalked it up to support, but Tara sensed something else, something that felt like control rather than care. Marvin rarely left the house except at odd hours. Sometimes he returned late at night with a cold expression, and other times he sat alone in the backyard, staring into the darkness with an unreadable look. Evelyn's life, once filled with morning walks and regular visits to friends, began to shrink. She spent more time at home, more time alone with Marvin, and less time in the outside world. Her absence from neighborhood gatherings was noticed immediately, and her sudden silence made Tara uneasy. Still, nothing concrete pointed to danger. Everything was subtle, neatly hidden beneath Marvin's calm personality. Evelyn trusted him completely, unaware that her world was quietly being reshaped. Ridgewood Lane continued its slow, ordinary rhythm, but inside Evelyn Harrow's home, a new tension had begun to settle thin, invisible and growing stronger with each day. And as the first year of their marriage approached, this tension would soon turn into something far darker than anyone on Ridgewood Lane could ever imagine. As the weeks of marriage slipped by, Evelyn Harrow's life slowly drifted away from the patterns she had kept for years. At first, the changes were so gradual that no one paid much attention. She stopped going on her morning walks, telling a few neighbors she felt tired more often. Her garden, once her source of comfort, started losing its gentle touch as she spent less time outdoors. People assumed she was adjusting to married life, but Tara Mullen felt the shift more strongly than anyone else. She lived close enough to notice things others didn't, and something about the silence surrounding the Harrow home made her uneasy. Marvin Kade had quickly taken over many responsibilities. He insisted on handling the mail, managing the bank visits, and doing all the grocery shopping. He told people that Evelyn needed rest, and on the surface, this sounded caring. But his presence became so constant and so controlling that Evelyn's absence from the world grew impossible to ignore. She no longer visited her favorite cafe or volunteered at the community center. Her friends began to grow concerned, though Marvin always had an explanation ready, delivered with a calm expression that left no room for doubt. Inside the house, Evelyn's behavior changed in ways that even she could not fully understand. She slept more, felt dizzy often, and lost her appetite. She assumed these were signs of aging or stress, unaware that Marvin always insisted on preparing her meals and organizing her medications. Her health grew weaker, and though she tried to push herself to be active again, her body resisted. Marvin reassured her that everything was fine, urging her to rely on him. Jonas Creed. Evelyn's nephew noticed something strange whenever he called. Marvin answered most of the time, claiming Evelyn was tired or asleep. Excuses, though gentle, felt rehearsed. Jonas lived in another city, but he knew his aunt well enough to sense that something was wrong. He planned a visit, yet Marvin always mentioned timing issues or suggested she needed quiet. Jonas tried to respect her privacy, unaware that each call he made increased Marvin's quiet tension. Meanwhile, Tara observed that the curtains of the house stayed closed long after sunrise. Well, the once lively home now looked quiet, almost lifeless. She rarely heard Evelyn's soft footsteps or saw her tending to the plants. Instead, she noticed Marvin roaming the yard with a watchful eye, often checking the surroundings as though guarding something. Late at night, she occasionally saw a faint glow from Evelyn's office window, a room she rarely used. Marvin seemed to spend hours inside it, yet no one understood why. Rumors started to drift through the neighborhood. Some believed Evelyn had chosen a more private life, while others whispered that Marvin had become overwhelmingly possessive. His calm, polite exterior made it difficult for anyone to challenge him. But an uneasy feeling settled over Ridgewood Lane. Neighbors felt something was changing behind Evelyn's closed doors, something that did not match the image of a happy marriage. Evelyn's withdrawal became more alarming when she stopped attending medical appointments she never missed before. Her doctor sent reminders, but Marvin insisted he could reschedule them. Jonas noticed she no longer replied to his messages, and when he asked for her directly, Marvin always insisted she was unwell. Evelyn's world was shrinking, piece by piece, and the more it shrank, the more Marvin's influence grew. One evening, Tara heard muffled sounds from the Harrow home, heavy movements, something falling, and then complete silence. She froze, listening closely, but the noise ended as quickly as it began. She convinced herself it could have been something simple, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that Evelyn might be in trouble. She considered calling someone, but hesitated, unsure of what she had actually heard. As the marriage approached the 52-week mark, the Harrow home seemed cut off from the outside world. Evelyn, once known for her warmth and openness, felt like a shadow that flickered for moments and then disappeared again. Marvin's grip on the household tightened further, and the neighbors' concerns grew sharper. People sensed that something inside that home was shifting from unusual to dangerous, but no one knew what was building behind those closed curtains. And soon the slow, worrying silence of Ridgewood Lane would break in a way none of them were prepared for. The worry surrounding Evelyn Harrow reached its peak the morning Tara Mullen noticed the overflowing mailbox. Evelyn had never allowed her mail to sit outside for more than a day. She was careful, organized, in particular about keeping her home presentable. But now, letters stuck out from the mailbox in uneven stacks, some already slipping onto the ground. Tara stared at them from her porch, feeling an uncomfortable chill crawl down her spine. Something was wrong. She could no longer convince herself otherwise. The curtains remained tightly closed, giving the house an abandoned appearance. No soft footsteps inside, no morning light peeking through the windows, no sound of Evelyn humming while watering plants. Marvin came and went at odd hours, always moving faster than before, always carrying bags that Tara had never seen before. He kept his head down, avoiding eye contact as if afraid that one glance might reveal too much, unable to ignore her instincts. Tara called Jonas Creed and told him something felt off. Jonas listened carefully, sensing the urgency in her tone. He drove down to Ridgewood Lane the next day, his worry intensifying with every mile. When he arrived, the house felt heavier than he remembered, as though something dark had settled inside it. He knocked, but there was no answer. Marvin's car was in the driveway, yet the house remained silent. Jonas contacted local authorities and requested a welfare check on his aunt. Officers arrived within minutes, and after knocking repeatedly with no response, they made the decision to enter the home. Tara watched from her window, her heart pounding as the officers slowly stepped inside. The interior of the house was unsettling. The usual warmth had been replaced by an eerie stillness. Dust had gathered on surfaces Evelyn cleaned daily. Her favorite teacup sat on the table, untouched. A half-finished knitting project lay abandoned on the sofa, as if dropped suddenly. The air felt stale, thick, and almost suffocating. Officers searched room by room, calling out Evelyn's name as they moved through the house. They found nothing unusual in the upstairs area, but the more they explored, the more the atmosphere shifted. Small signs hinted at something being wrong. Furniture slightly moved. Picture frames tilted, doors that should have been open now shut tight. When they reached the basement door, one officer paused. The door was unlocked but unusually stiff, as though it had not been opened in a long time. Dust patterns near the handle suggested it had been wiped recently. The officer pushed it open, and cold air drifted upward from the basement steps. The officers descended slowly, their flashlights scanning the dim space. The basement smelled of detergent and metal, a strange combination that did not belong in a laundry room. A basket of clothes sat near the washing machine, untouched. But a few items were scattered across the floor in unnatural positions. It looked like something had been moved or cleaned hurriedly. When the beam of a flashlight reached the far corner of the basement, it stopped. There, near the laundry area, lay the still body of Evelyn Harrow. Her position was unnatural, her appearance silent and heartbreaking. It looked at first like she had fallen, but the details did not align with a simple accident. One of the officers immediately called for medical support, while the others secured the area. Marvin appeared at the top of the stairs moments later, startled by the commotion. His expression shifted quickly from confusion to a strange calm, almost too calm for the situation. He provided an explanation about an accidental fall, about how Evelyn had been unwell. His words seemed prepared, almost rehearsed, as if waiting for the moment he would need them. Detective Rhea Solberg was called to the scene. The moment she entered the basement, something felt wrong to her. The positioning of the body, faint marks on Evelyn's wrists, and the freshly cleaned floor all contradicted Marvin's explanation. She took in every detail with quiet focus, her instincts telling her that this was not a tragic accident. The coroner arrived shortly after, and although the initial assessment remained inconclusive, nothing about the setting gave comfort. As Evelyn's body was taken from the basement, the quiet street of Ridgewood Lane fell into a heavy silence, one filled with fear, suspicion, and unanswered questions. Detective Solberg left the house with a growing certainty. Something dangerous had taken place behind those closed curtains, and the truth behind it was only beginning to reveal itself. Detective Rhea Solberg left Evelyn Harrow's home that evening with more questions than answers. The scene felt staged, too clean in some areas, and too disturbed in others. The faint marks on Evelyn's wrists stayed in her mind, and the freshly washed section of the basement floor bothered her. If it had been a simple fall, there would have been no reason for anyone to clean anything. The smell of detergent still lingered in the air, mixing with the cold stillness of the basement. Something about it felt wrong. Her first step was to look into Marvin Kade. His calm behavior during questioning had been unusual. Most people in such tragic situations were shaken, but Marvin behaved like someone prepared for the moment. His tone never wavered, his responses never stumbled. It was the kind of composure that made detectives uneasy, especially detectives with instincts as sharp as Rhea's. When she ran his identification, the first crack appeared. The system returned records that didn't align with each other. His date of birth was the same, but the names connected to it were different. In one state, he had lived under the name Elistray. In another, he had gone by Mark Talden. And in both cases, he had lived with older partners who had passed away unexpectedly. The law had never connected the events. The pattern was unmistakable. Detective Solberg pulled every file she could find on those previous cases. The details were chilling. In one file, his partner had died from heart failure. In another, the cause was listed as complications from a fall. Nothing had ever tied him directly to the deaths, but the similarities were far too strong to ignore. Each time, he had stayed just long enough to gain financial stability, before disappearing and reinventing himself under a new name. Meanwhile, Jonas Creed returned to Ridgewood Lane, shaken by the discovery of his aunt's body. He visited the station to tell Detective Solberg something he had kept to himself until then, a month before Evelyn disappeared from public life. She had contacted him about strange changes in her home. She felt exhausted all the time and could not explain why. Jonas brushed it off as stress, but now, every detail haunted him. Detective Solberg decided to search Evelyn's home more thoroughly. She returned the next morning with a forensic team. This time the atmosphere inside felt even heavier. Marvin was absent, which allowed the team to move freely without interference. They found small, but alarming details. Evelyn's pill bottles were rearranged, and some contained fewer tablets than expected. The kitchen trash held traces of crushed medication. A drawer in Evelyn's office contained documents that had been recently disturbed, including financial papers with Marvin's handwriting added to them in the bedroom. Forensic experts found fibers on Evelyn's blanket that matched Marvin's work clothes. The pattern of dust on the floor suggested someone had dragged something heavy recently. Every small clue strengthened Rhea's belief that Evelyn had not collapsed on her own. Something had weakened her over time. Something had been planned. Tara Mullen added another layer to the story. When she visited the station to provide her testimony, she described the thud she had heard late one night, the strange hours Marvin kept, and the growing silence from the house. Her voice trembled as she spoke, but she wanted answers as much as the detectives did. She confessed that she had ignored her instincts for too long, felt the weight of that decision now. The phone records were the final piece that deepened the mystery. Marvin had made several late-night calls to an international number the night before Evelyn's death. The conversations were long, lasting nearly an hour each time. The records provided no content, but the timing raised suspicion. Why would someone make repeated calls hours before his wife supposedly fell accidentally? Detective Solberg pinned the information on a board in her office, connecting each discovery like threads in a tightening web. Every connection, every clue, every pattern pointed toward something far more deliberate than a tragic fall. Marvin Kade was no grieving husband. He was someone with a silent history, a man whose past blended with shadows and vanished partners. For the first time since stepping into the case, Detective Solberg began to see the shape of the truth forming. The next step would bring her closer to exposing what had really happened during the 52 weeks of Evelyn Harrow's marriage. But the danger in uncovering the truth was beginning to rise. She knew the final confrontation would reveal secrets darker than she had anticipated. Detective Rhea Solberg knew the case had reached a turning point when Marvin attempted to leave the state only 3 days after Evelyn's funeral. His bags were packed neatly, his documents collected, and his car loaded before sunrise. But authorities detained him at a nearby highway checkpoint after Detective Solberg issued a request to keep him under observation. His attempt to leave so quickly confirmed what she already suspected. Marvin was trying to escape before the truth caught up to him at the station. Marvin remained calm, answering every question with a steady expression. His lack of visible emotion made the room feel colder. He showed no grief, no shock, and no hesitation. It was as though he had rehearsed every sentence long before sitting in front of investigators. Detective Solberg watched him carefully, noting how he avoided mentioning details that mattered while repeating the same statements again and again, as if practiced. Forensic reports arrived that afternoon, shedding new light on Evelyn's last week's toxicology tests revealed traces of sedative medication in her blood levels far above anything she had ever been prescribed. The dosage suggested long-term administration, not a single incident. Someone had been giving her small amounts over time, slowly weakening her body until she could barely stand without feeling dizzy. Her sudden fatigue, her missing appointments, her lost appetite, everything aligned now. She had not been growing sick naturally. She had been fed something designed to drain her strength. Even more alarming was the discovery found on the basement floor. A faint, almost cleaned-away residue on the tiles tested positive for a mixture of detergent and blood. The streak pattern indicated someone had wiped the area. Not an accidental spill, but an intentional effort to remove evidence. The investigators also examined the work boots found in the garage. Embedded deep in the soles, hidden in the grooves, were small particles of basement dust mixed with traces of the same detergent. Someone had cleaned the boots, but not well enough to erase all signs. Financial investigators uncovered further proof of Marvin's long-term plan. Bank records showed that shortly after the marriage, Marvin had slowly gained access to Evelyn's accounts. He had transferred funds between joint accounts, sold her late husband's valuables, and withdrawn cash in small amounts over several months to avoid suspicion. They found documents showing that Evelyn's will had been changed within the first half of the marriage, naming Marvin as her primary heir. Every decision had been made quietly, without Evelyn's usual attention to her finances. It became clear that Marvin had positioned himself to take everything when the time came. Phone records completed the picture. The late-night international calls made just before Evelyn's death were linked to someone living overseas, likely a partner or acquaintance familiar with Marvin's false identities. The calls lasted long enough to suggest planning rather than casual conversation. Whatever had been discussed that night connected directly to the events that followed. Detective Solberg confronted Marvin with the evidence piece by piece. Even as she listed the details, Marvin maintained a rigid expression, as if refusing to let anything break through his surface. But behind his calm eyes, she sensed the quiet panic of a man who had finally run out of places to hide. Every identity he had used in the past had been built on manipulation and disappearance. This time, the pattern had caught up to him. When the arrest warrant was signed, Marvin barely reacted. Officers escorted him out of the interrogation room, and for the first time, he looked smaller, stripped of the confidence he once carried so carefully. The community of Ridgewood Lane watched the news unfold with disbelief and grief. Evelyn's gentle presence had been a comfort to many, and the revelation of what had happened inside her own home shook the neighborhood deeply. The case closed with Marvin charged with first-degree murder, fraud, identity manipulation, and financial exploitation. He had spent 52 weeks crafting a life beside Evelyn, only to tear it apart piece by piece when she became an obstacle instead of an opportunity. His charm, his careful behavior, and his quiet nature had all been a mask hiding a pattern of calculated deception. Detective Solberg filed the final report, knowing that Evelyn's story would stay with her. It was a reminder that danger sometimes hides behind gentle smiles and soft voices, and that trust can be broken in the quietest ways. The tragedy of Evelyn Harrow remained etched into the memories of those who knew her, a warning of how easily a predator can slip into an unsuspecting life. And while the truth had finally been revealed, the haunting silence of Ridgewood Lane would never feel quite the same again.